All right, ladies and gentlemen. So, the point of today's lesson and the focus on today's lesson is going to be to kind of finish up Washington's presidency. Now, I'm hoping that this video will not be as long, maybe be a little bit shorter than the video on Thursday, but most likely it'll be right around that length of time, considering that we have a lot to get through and a lot to talk about in this video. So, uh, when we look at Washington's presidency, we're going to look at a few different incidents. There's going to be two kind of conflicts that are going to pop up that are outside of the United States during Washington's presidency, and there's going to be two conflicts that really pop up inside the United States during Washington's presidency. And I want to look at all four of those. So, the first, I want to start off by focusing on the events that are going to happen outside of the United States. So, as we know, George Washington took office in 1789. That was his first year as president. And at the same time that Washington is becoming president of the United States, the French find themselves in a revolution, their own revolution. Our allies that helped us win the Revolutionary War now find themselves in their own revolution known as the French Revolution. And in 1789, now this is a revolution where the working class and where the middle class citizens of France are trying to overthrow the wealthy and ruling class in France. They feel like they're not getting a say. They feel like they don't have a voice in France. So they decide that they want to overthrow the French government and really kind of prevent the wealthy ruling class from continuing to rule. And in 1789, they are successful and they are able to overthrow their king, King Louis XVI, and his wife, Marie Antoinette. Now, this seems like a great thing for the French. Many Americans look at the French Revolution and believe that they are going to take and kind of create a republic and a democracy like the United States has. However, that is not going to be the case. And the French Revolution is actually going to lead France towards a whole dark path that you guys are actually going to learn about. Excuse me, sorry about that, guys. That you guys are going to learn about when you get to 10th grade. And I don't want to spend a ton of time on it and really go into a lot of detail. But suffice it to say, after the king and queen are overthrown, there is a short period where France establishes a democracy and is seen as a country that is going to be able to have a stable democracy. So there are many American citizens that believe that France is somebody that the United States should help out. Not only did they help out in the American Revolution, in the American Revolution, but France is also going through its own revolution. And if you can have two Western countries have the same style of government, you can really make it so that you have a strong set of ties and a strong ally in France if they have the same kind of government system that you do. That is the way Thomas Jefferson thinks. He looks at it as they helped us in the Revolutionary War, and they're trying to create a government exactly like ours, which is going to allow us to have an ally that is strong and that can assist us when we need it while we're trying to build a strong country and a strong army and navy and everything that you might need to defend yourselves and sustain yourselves. So that's what Thomas Jefferson looks at and what he sees and why he is one of the people that wants to kind of help the French and help their revolution kind of really take hold and to establish a democracy. Now, Alexander Hamilton, on the other hand, looks at this and he says, no, this is a mess. I want nothing to do with this. It's going to stop trade. It's going to stop commerce. It's going to stop business. That's not okay. Plus, if we really look at the world, England is the leading trading nation in the entire world. So Hamilton's view, he wants to take and kind of buddy up more to England and gain England as more of an ally than France, because economically, England is a much stronger partner and a much better partner for the United States, as Hamilton sees it, than France. So you had these two opposing views. You have Jefferson, who wants to take and ally himself with France because they're creating a democracy and they helped during the Revolutionary War. And then you have Alexander Hamilton, who wants to side with the British because they are they're much stronger economically, and they're the trade leaders of the world. Excuse me. So these are the two different ideas that not only exist in Washington's cabinet, but also exist in the United States as a whole. So this is where the United States kind of finds itself, and Washington has to come to a decision about who they are going to side with, because the French Revolution has led England and France to start a war with each other and start fighting each other. So the reason that the United States has so many people wanting to pick a side is because England and France are at war, and each Jefferson and Hamilton want the United States to side with a different country in that war. Ultimately, however, Washington decides that getting involved in that war is not something that the United States should do at all. They should have nothing to do with it. All it is going to do is create bloodshed. It's going to hurt the United States, who is just starting to build itself and just starting to establish its government and establish itself as a nation in the world. Throwing itself into war, Washington feels, would just be a bad thing for the United States and lead to the destruction of the United States. So in 1793, George Washington decides to issue what's known as the Neutrality Proclamation. And what that does is basically says and pledges mutual friendship and the desire to trade with both France and England. So the United States does not want to pick sides. It wants to just kind of ride the middle and not get involved in the disagreement that England and France find themselves in. Well, the French ambassador to the United States, a guy by the name of Citizen Genet, does not want to take that as the final answer. So what he decides to do is he decides to go around Washington, around Jefferson, around Hamilton, and really take his case to the American people and really try to make the case for the United States siding with France. Take that case to the American people. Now, when he does this, all that really does in terms of, all that does for France, I should say, is to get Washington, the President of the United States, and his cabinet and all the leading members of the United States government angry with him and angry with France. And it pushes the United States closer to England. And it also causes Thomas Jefferson to resign his cabinet position because he had advocated for the United States to ally itself with France. But this Neutrality Proclamation is going to be something that the United States is going to adopt until George Washington is no longer president in 1796. That is the way that the United States is going to work. The United States is going to carry itself until George Washington is no longer president. And kind of the way Citizen Genet handled this proclamation really kind of pushed the United States away from France and towards England. Now, that is made even more clear with Jay's Treaty, which is signed in late 1793. So once this Neutrality Proclamation hits and the United States is trading with France and England, England is okay with the United States trading with itself, trading with England, but they're not okay with the United States trading with France. England doesn't know what the United States is trading with France, and they don't know if it's something that could hurt them in the war. Excuse me. So what they decide to do is they decide to start attacking U.S. ships and start taking and confiscating the cargo of U.S. merchant ships. Now that's going to really anger American citizens, and it's going to lead some people to want to declare war on England. But again, Washington knows that the United States would never survive a war against England. So what he decides to do instead is in 1794, he sends Chief Justice John Jay to London to negotiate a treaty with England. Now, England, after the Revolutionary War, on top of confiscating ships and cargo from U.S. merchant ships, also never moved out of the Ohio River Valley. And that's going to play into the first kind of conflict that's going to happen at home. But Jay's Treaty is another way that Washington is going to kind of settle and kind of not so much ally himself, but kind of keep the United States away from fighting a war and allow the United States to be able to take and build itself up and make itself strong so it could stand on its own. So Washington sends Chief Justice John Jay to London in 1794, and John Jay is trying to negotiate not only getting those soldiers out of the Ohio River Valley, but more importantly, the end of the British Navy confiscating goods that U.S. merchants are shipping overseas and stuff like that. So the United States is trying to get the British to kind of do those two things so that they don't have to worry about England really coming after them and fighting them and disrupting their country and just disrupting how the United States is kind of setting itself up and building itself. So ultimately, with Jay's Treaty, the British agree to do that so long as Americans agree to pay outstanding pre-Revolutionary War debts to British creditors. Now, this is something that's really going to anger U.S. citizens, and they're going to look at it as the United States gave more than it got from Jay's Treaty, and they're going to be very, very angry with Chief Justice John Jay. Excuse me. But the good part of this is that the British are going to agree to move out of the Ohio River Valley and close their forts, and they're going to agree to stop confiscating American goods and boarding American ships and seizing goods from those ships. So at the end of the day, Washington is able to, and John Jay are able to pull the United States away from war. But many look at that treaty as paying too high of a price. So whether it is too high of a price or not is kind of up for debate and up for opinion, but that the provisions that the United States got are going to help them grow and expand and set themselves up as a country. So those are the two things, those are the two kind of ways that Washington had to navigate away from war and get the United States away from war early on in his presidency. Now, there are also two instances that happened from home, that happened in the United States, that really kind of tested Washington's presidency. And the first conflict that really tested Washington's presidency was the Indian Intercourse Act and the Battle of Fallen Timbers. So in 1790, Congress passed the Indian Intercourse Act, which would regulate all trade with Native Americans and said that the United States would only acquire new Western lands using official treaties. The reason for this was because many U.S. citizens that lived close to the frontier wanted to move into the Ohio River Valley and were starting to move into the Ohio River Valley to get that farmland. The problem is many Native Americans still lived there and did not want American farmers moving into their lands and taking over their land. So they were able to get an agreement to get this Indian Intercourse Act signed, which said that the United States would only acquire new Western lands using official treaties. So Native Americans looked at that as a win, as a way to stop citizens of the United States from coming onto their land and stealing their land. However, most farmers really decided to ignore this and stole Native American lands in the Ohio River Valley because they wanted it, so they walked in and they took it. Now, Native Americans are going to try to resist this. And if you guys remember a few minutes ago when I talked about Jay's Treaty and I talked about how the British, even though they had lost the Revolutionary War, and even though they no longer had control of the United States, they still had forts and they still had soldiers in the western frontier and in the Ohio River Valley. So, to really kind of destabilize the United States and hurt the United States and help themselves, the British decided to kind of instigate that a little bit and can help to kind of told Native Americans that they would support Native Americans in their resistance to the United States and provided them with weapons and things that they needed to resist the United States. Now, in 1794, the United States are resisting, or the Native Americans are resisting, I'm sorry, guys. Native Americans are resisting the United States. Now, the United States sends in soldiers to kind of put down this resistance, and ultimately in 1794, in August of 1794, the Battle of Fallen Timbers takes place, where a confederation of Native Americans that lived in or around the Ohio River Valley are defeated by the United States Army. And at that point, they are forced to sign the Treaty of Grenville, which gave the United States claim to most Native American lands in the Northwest Territory, and it guaranteed the safety of United States citizens. After this defeat, later on in November, Jay's Treaty is signed. So it's nothing for British soldiers and the British to take their soldiers out of the Northwest Territory and out of the Ohio River Valley, because there's no way that they can take and try to destabilize the United States from the Northwest Territory anymore. So they're not really giving up a whole lot. So after the Battle of Fallen Timbers and the defeat of Native Americans by the United States, they are forced to sign the Treaty of Grenville, which we talked about, just mentioned, that the United States claims most of the Native American lands in the Northwest Territory, and it guarantees the safety to United States citizens. In exchange, natives received $20,000 worth of goods and an acknowledgement of their claim to the lands they still held. So they were given small reservations to live on, but most of the Northwest Territory was now going to go to the United States. So Washington was able to use the military to kind of put down resistance to the government in the United States. The other conflict that Washington had to face at home was the Whiskey Rebellion. So Alexander Hamilton needed ways to pay down the national debt and pay down the state debt that the United States government had just taken on. So one of the ways that he thought to do that was a tax on liquor. Many farmers converted some of the grain they harvested into alcohol to save cost. This way you don't lose your crop. This way you don't lose money by growing and not being able to sell crops that you've grown. So what Alexander Hamilton is going to do is he's going to take and tax liquor and put a tax on the sale of liquor, which is something that many Americans bought and was a very popular commodity and a very popular good that was sold in the United States. Now, farmers are not the wealthiest people in the world, and we also know that farmers are not huge fans of being taxed a lot. So a small band of Pennsylvania farmers decided that they were not going to accept this tax on liquor. So they marched toward the Capitol to protest Hamilton's tax. Washington realizes that this is a huge issue. And if he wants the government to be stable and to be seen as strong and a country that is strong, he cannot let his citizens decide to rise up whenever they want to. He can't have another Shays Rebellion. So what Washington does is he sends an army of 13,000 men to stop this rebellion and to prevent these Pennsylvania farmers from trying to overthrow the government. When the farmers saw these 13,000 soldiers, they quickly disbanded without a fight at the display of federal force. As I said minutes ago, Washington needed to show the people of the United States that they could not rebel against any government when they made one decision they did not like. That leads to a very unstable country and a very unstable government, and that's not something that Washington and the United States can have. So as we've seen, Washington tries to kind of stay away from war and stay away from conflict when it's not inside of the United States. When, when the French and the British go to war, Washington declares neutrality. When the British are trying to kind of instigate a war and force the United States into war, Washington does what he can to prevent the United States from being drawn into war with England. However, when the citizens try to rise up and kind of form and shape the government from the inside, that's when Washington knows that that is a fight he can win and knows that he needs to make it clear that the government is strong, the government is stable, and the citizens need to listen to and follow the government. So that is kind of the story of George Washington, and that's the story of his presidency and how he dealt with the conflicts that came up during his presidency. Now, after 2 terms as president, Washington realizes and Washington decides that he's had enough. He has served his country since the French and Indian War. He then served as the general of the Continental Army in the Revolutionary War, and now he served 2 terms as president. He feels that he has served his country, he feels that he has done his duty, and all he wants to do is go home. So in 1796, he declares that he's not going to run for a 3rd term and that he's actually going to take and go back home and be a private citizen. And that precedent of only serving 2 terms as president is going to be started by Washington and continued with the exception of 1 president up to today. So if ever there was a question of why presidents only serve 2 terms, George Washington is why, and that's why presidents only serve 2 terms and only are allowed 2 terms. So the one last thing that Washington does before he decides to go and be a private citizen in Virginia is he tries to leave the United States with some advice in the United States and kind of impart his wisdom or give his wisdom to not only the next president, but the people of the United States as well. And he gives a farewell address in 1796, and he calls for 4 things, as you can see on the slide. Do not get involved in European affairs. Do not create political parties. Do not accumulate too much debt, or do not build a huge debt that you have to pay back. And do not become victims of sectionalism, or do not think that your section of the country is more important than your country as a whole. Always remember that the United States are in it together. Always remember that the United States are in it together. Those are the 4 points and the 4 pieces of wisdom that Washington tries to get across to the United States and get across to the next president before he decides to step down. So that is a summary of Washington's presidency. Those were the few important events that happened during Washington's presidency. that wraps up what we're going to talk about today, guys. So, what I'd like you to do now is I'd like you to go ahead and work on your Unit 7 key terms, your homework for tomorrow. You can go ahead and work on that. As I said in the first video, you'll find all of that in your in Google Classroom. You'll find the textbook and the list of key terms in case you forget it, in case you forgot where it got posted. You'll have that, and you have that so you can take a look at it. All right, guys, I hope you have a fantastic day. Stay safe, and I'll see you tomorrow.